All right, hey everybody, Brian Kenny here. It's MLB Now. We're joined today by Bob Costas. Bob, strange times. Good to talk to you. Good to see you. How is your life? What is it like for you these days?
We're fine. Thankfully, the whole family is fine. A friend of mine about a week ago said, we're fortunate. We just have to adjust. A lot of other people have to figure out how to survive. So other than the Groundhog Day aspect of this and just wondering when that's going to change, and it looks like it's far down the road, we are absolutely fine and very thankful to be able to say so.
It is strange times, isn't it? Because I'm talking to my wife about it, and it's like you've been through wars, natural disasters, and in this case, everything looks the same for us.
Mhm.
Meaning, obviously, not for medical personnel, police, firemen, especially in New
Yeah.
York, extremely dangerous and trying. But for most of us, it's everything is working, and yet everything's not working. And here
Yeah.
we are. It is a very different sort of situation.
Only this morning before I hooked up with you here, I was talking to the former baseball commissioner, Fay Vincent, and he was recollecting, he was in charge, Bart Giamatti had just recently passed away, the earthquake series in San Francisco in 1989. And I think it was 10 days before they could resume. But as tragic and devastating as that was, it had a beginning and it had an end. And then people picked themselves back up. They concluded the World Series. People were happy to have baseball, and then eventually football was in season then. We talked about FDR saying, we're not going to suspend baseball. He told the Commissioner Landis at that time, continue baseball during World War II. Some 4F guys, some guys that might have been minor leaguers, they kept playing baseball, but it was possible to do that. After 9/11, the country was traumatized. There were changes in the way we went about our lives that still have ripple effects today, but eventually normal life or close to normal resumed. And in fact, baseball was part of the healing process. We all remember the Mike Piazza game at Shea Stadium. We remember George Bush throwing out the first pitch at Yankee Stadium before Game 3, which uplifted the nation. But here, we're just treading water. There isn't any, we don't know for sure when a step back toward normal begins.
I look back, Bob, at the last time that this sort of pandemic occurred on a wide scale in this country, which also ties into baseball, 1918, right? Obviously, way back, but at that time, I don't know about you, Bob, I've had a little time on my hands. I was able to read a book on it. I saw the PBS special on it, and I'm just looking at all this, and it was amazing. They played that World Series 1918 in early September,
Yes.
Just before the pandemic really hit, especially in Boston where they were playing it. And this is all at the same time, almost like, in the same exact time period as the first major U.S. offensive in France in World War I, which was, again, like the worst catastrophe in human history. They played the World Series amid like labor strife as well. The players had a little sit-down strike before one of the games, but they didn't want to look like malingerers. So I guess the only thing I'm reading about that is it was actually crazier. Like, it was awful, but then you're doing it while you're fighting what was at the time, and probably still to this day, like the most catastrophic war in human history. So, and they actually played a World Series just before it really swept through Boston.
Yeah, and the earlying up of that World Series, BK, as you know, was much more in deference to the circumstances surrounding World War I than to the pandemic, which was coming up shortly but hadn't hit, as you said.
So here we are, Bob, and for years you've written books on it. You like to do thought experiments as to, hey, how do we play baseball and what do we do? You were at the forefront of that. So what rolls through your mind now that baseball has to come up with a contingency plan at some point? We don't know when. As we sit here today, we don't know. But what do you think could happen? What do you think would be interesting for baseball to try if it can get back on the field this year?
Well, let's assume that they are able to get back on the field at some point this year, and that's a large assumption. But for the sake of this discussion, if they can, I think all baseball fans, including the traditionalists, all would accept that everything is on the table because this is a unique situation. So obviously a shortened number of regular season games, whatever that number is, people would accept that. I think they'd even accept debating whether you should play doubleheaders and have those doubleheaders each be 7 innings. the way they are, each game be 7 innings the way they are in the minor leagues. They'd accept a reconfigured playoff circumstance. They'd accept a neutral field World Series because they would know that this is a unique circumstance, and they'd welcome baseball back because they would have missed it. But they'd only welcome it back if they had a real feeling of assurance that it was safe and practical to do so. And that's even without fans in the stands, because it's not just the 25 players on each roster. You think of all the auxiliary personnel, and we're doing it for television. As you know, BK, you've been in television trucks. If people were any closer to each other, they'd be sitting in each other's laps. There's no social distancing in television trucks. Even if the curve, as they're referring to it, has been substantially flattened, even if you look at it, it's in ascent on the left side, and then it's in descent on the right side. And let's say it's substantially descending. As long as there's anything remaining, you don't want to get into a situation where you contribute to it spiking again. So I think that people would accept any sort of reconfiguration of baseball in the short term as long as they were sure that it was safe to play.
Right. What are your thoughts on baseball without people in the stands? Like that's it's strange. You can envision it. Okay. What do you envision?
It would be very strange, and I think the only model we have for it is that game the White Sox played against the Orioles after unrest in Baltimore. And Gary Thorne did an inspired thing. He decided to call half an inning, or at least a few batters, as if he was overlooking the 18th green at the Masters. So in whispers, he was calling a double into the gap. And I recall Buck Showalter saying afterward that he could actually hear Gary Thorne and Jim Palmer talking from the dugout. He could hear them from upstairs. It would be very strange. And since we're doing all this for television, you know, as a broadcaster, Brian, and the viewer takes this for granted, 5-6 seconds of actual dead air where there's no sound at all seems like an eternity on television, and even more so on radio. You think you've lost the signal. So it isn't just when the crowd roars after a home run or a great play. There's ambient sound. There's a low hum during a baseball game. That will be gone. This will be like the Twilight Zone. But if they can play safely, better baseball under those conditions than no baseball at all.
Right. Joel Sherman was with us on Tuesday, and he mentioned, well, if you could mic the players and hear what the players were saying, that would be a whole different experience, because you're right. That murmuring in the stands is what you love to hear, right? Just that when you lay out as a broadcaster, you lay out, you hear that nice murmuring. That's always a pleasant thing to hear. Bob, I wanted to ask you about, and you mentioned, briefly September 11th, 2001, and following not too far after that was the World Series. We're going to be showing the 2001 World Series Game 7 on MLB Network coming up today. What stands out? Obviously a classic series. What stands out in your mind?
So many different things. The two extraordinary Yankee comebacks that, if you handed them in as a movie script, they'd reject it as too out of hand. Those two games at Yankee Stadium. And then you go to Game 7, you got Clemens hooking up with Schilling. Mariano Rivera goes to the mound, almost a lock for the bottom of the ninth, and the Diamondbacks put together that rally. And, Tom Verducci and I did that Greatest Game series about a decade ago, the 20 greatest games of the preceding 50 years, 1960 through 2010. And Game 7 was on that list. I think an earlier game, Game 3 from that series, was also among the 20. And what you found in looking back at all these games, Tom and I doing our own research, but especially talking to the participants who joined us in Studio 42, we always remember the climactic moments. And even those of us who follow it closely sometimes forget all the little nuanced things that led up to it. There was a bunt play in that ninth inning. Jay Bell bunted for the Diamondbacks, and they got the force at third base. Brocious took the throw at third base and just looked down. And Jay Bell wasn't halfway up the line to first. If he throws to first, and Tim McCarver said it in real time, if he throws to first, it's a double play. The infield never has to come in. That little pop that Gonzalez hit is an easy catch. You or I could have caught it, let alone Derek Jeter. The whole thing turns out differently, but that's part of the fascination in sports. You change one little thing, it's like a pebble that starts an avalanche.
Right. Well, people get to see all the nuances of it. They'll see it play by play coming up on MLB Network today. So everyone out there, please stay safe, stay isolated. We'll get through this. Bob, stay safe. Always a pleasure talking baseball with you. Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, BK. Talk soon, I hope.